The list of his connections to this school and to the Little Rock Nine goes on and on and on. In fact, in the summer of 2016, he and some of the members of the Little Rock Nine joined me and a few hundred other people in the basement of Central High School during a tornado warning. The tornado warning turned out to be a major weather event, with part of our roof being torn away and 2 classrooms being destroyed. As Central High's very proud principal, I'm going to take a moment of personal privilege to say thank you. Thank you for all you have done for this school. Your life and career are the embodiment of the 4 statues which adorn the front of our school and have looked out upon 90 years of history. Ambition, personality, opportunity, and preparation. Now, ladies and gentlemen, and my children behind me, it gives me great honor to say, would you help me and please welcome to the podium the 42nd President of the United States, William Jefferson Clinton.
Thank you. Oh, thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. First of all, thank you, Madam Principal, for your leadership of, in some ways, the most important high school in the United States. Thank you, Superintendent. Thanks to the Park Service for taking good care of us. Thank you, Dr. Jordan, for demonstrating just by the way you talk how dumb it was to deny so many African Americans the opportunity of a decent education for so long. You were an inspiration. I thank all of you who came. Happy birthday, Annie Abrams. Governor Tucker, thank you. Secretary Slater, thank you for all you did for our country. I want to thank you, whoever did the program, for letting Darren and Joy speak, for they are the true heirs of what was done here 60 years ago. And from one of them, I benefit every single day. I want to thank Melba and Elizabeth and Ernie and Gloria and Terrence and Minijine and Thelma and 2 who are not here, Jeff and Daisy Bates. We missed them both. God, they were wonderful, weren't they? And I want to thank my old friend who was introduced as Dr. Henry Louis Gates. But if you want to laugh about the aging process, which trust me is not for sissies, when I saw him coming up here with his crutches, I thought, how cute. Why? Because all of his friends call him Skip. And then he took the pink elephant out of the closet so the rest of us could talk. This is also the 40th anniversary this year of my first speech as a public official, and it's got a lot in common with today. I spoke at the Rotary Club installation banquet in Pine Bluff. There were 500 people there. There were 25 speakers. By the time I got up to speak, half the people were hungry again. And the guy who introduced me had run the campaign for me down there, and he was more nervous than I was. I was a young attorney general, and he got up and said, "You know, we could stop here and have had a very good evening." Now, what he meant was, oh, the best is yet to come, but what it sounded like was the truth. Please, I want to go home. But I thank them all. I thank this group for letting me be a part of their lives, for sharing their true feelings, for giving us each in their own way the true meaning of what we're here about. I wanted to come here and reminisce. I was here for the 20th anniversary, not even all of them were. And Jesse Jackson and I were on this stage. And he told the students at Little Rock Central High, because America was facing a big drug epidemic then too, like this awful opioid epidemic today, and heroin and fentanyl and the whole deal, that they should open their brains and not their veins. I say that because he too is aging and not in the best shape today. But we should never forget that long before it was popular, he called on people to develop their minds and do their work so they could claim their legitimate place in America. Skip Gates in his Other Life has a TV show. Have you all ever seen it? You seen his show? And he traces our lineage. Shows that Governor Hutchinson may be related to John Brown or King George III or God only knows who. But it's important. I want to start there. What does all that they said amount to? What was the pink elephant in the closet that Skip dug out? By tracing people's genetic lineage, you find out almost no black people are all black. And almost zero African Americans, and maybe there's not a single one, whose entire lineage comes from people from sub-Saharan Africa. And almost no white people are all white either. And unless all your ancestors are from sub-Saharan Africa, between 3 and 4% of your human genome is from the Neanderthals. That's the part that's been rearing its ugly head lately. Now, look, you know, ever since I've been out of office, I've been doing these crazy things. I have this endlessly amended bucket list, and one of the things I wanted to do was understand genomics, particle physics, and astrophysics, but I really wanted genomics because I spent $3 billion of your tax money to sequence the human genome. And now you can do it for about $100, and it's given us more than $300 billion in economic activity. So it's the best investment of your tax money ever made, and a good reminder that you get a big return when you invest in modernizing infrastructure and science and technology as well. So anyway, so I keep reading all these articles. One day I read that, but you know, our human ancestors first rose up on the East African savanna between 150 and 200,000 years ago, and it took them 90 to 100,000 years to get all the way to the north of Africa and then into the Middle East and into Europe. And for 40,000 years after that, we co-inhabited Europe with the Neanderthals. It turns out we liked each other better than we knew. But they were bigger than us. They were stronger than we are. Their brains were just as big, but for reasons no one fully knows, as far as we can determine, they never wrote a book or a poem or spoke to each other in traditional ways. But it appears that they didn't survive the last era of really big mammals, and we did, perhaps because we could run faster, but in all probability because we could communicate and we could cooperate. The great biologist E.O. Wilson says that the greatest cooperators are the most likely to survive, and the best species that have ever lived for cooperation were ants, termites, bees, and people. My library, all the people at the Presidential Center make fun of me. We just had that great exhibit where you could see all my cooperators. But it's true, when we had the tsunami in South Asia, cooperative, instinctive patterns of animals saved a bunch of them when people were killed. In South America, there are termites that only drill air-conditioned housing. I'm going to tell you what that's got to do with all this. I want you to think. 5 holes in their living quarters. They go in and out of one. The rest is all air conditioning. When it's going to rain, they know it, and they stay out so they don't drown. Bees pollinate 96% of all the food human beings consume. You should really worry that a lot of the bees are dying now because of environmental and chemical conditions beyond their control. The combined weights of ants on Earth exceeds the combined weight of people on Earth. The most touching non-human picture I saw from the awful devastation of Harvey in the Gulf Coast and in Houston was this gushing water in what had been a city street, and on it this massive blob of fire ants. Must have been 100,000 or more of them, and those on the bottom sacrificed themselves so that they could glue themselves together and they would all survive by floating away to freedom. But we can do more of that. I wanted to stand up and say a lot of simple bromides about that and make everybody feel good and tell them I love them and sit down. But then we had all this stuff happening that other people have talked about. So I wanted to say, you did 60 years, take a victory lap, put on your dancing shoes, have a good time. But instead I have to say, you got to put on your marching boots and lead us again. This is not a partisan issue. Abraham Lincoln gave his life to hold the Union together and to pass the 13th Amendment ending slavery everywhere. Ulysses Grant, a greatly misunderstood and underrated figure in our history, not just as a general but as a president, gave us the 15th Amendment, the right to vote, which he said was the most important thing that had happened since the founding of the United States of America. And last time I was here on this stage was with George W. Bush. Because our Leadership Scholars Program takes turns doing our graduations where his library is and where mine is. But we get 60 people every year, equally divided by party, representative of race, gender, sexual orientation, religion, you name it. they come together and they go to his father's library, the LBJ library, his and ours here, and study some decision at each place together. And they talk about it together. And these are people who readily admit that in the world we live in, they would never have met each other had it not been for this program. And they study these decisions, and then they discuss how they ought to be made when they agree on the end. And lo and behold, they find out there really is something to the most important study behind the science that made Skip Gates' program so fascinating, which is that we're all 99.5% the same genomically. Every non-age-related difference you can see in this audience is rooted in 0.5% of your genome. We are now living in a world where we're going back and revisiting the original questions of this country and the original things that tore this country apart in the civil rights movement, which is basically whether all that matters is what's in that 0.5%. It's bad enough that every single one of us, for reasons of personal vanity, spend 99.5% of our time thinking about the 0.5% of ourselves that are different, don't we? Wish I were a little taller. If I had LeBron James's body, I'd have gone a different line of work. If I could have played a saxophone like John Coltrane, I'd have gone on a different line of work. You got it. We all spend all this time. Bad enough we do that. Now, we're back to square one. That's all that matters. Back to tribalism. And it's sweeping the world. It is entirely understandable, and I think was entirely predictable. Anybody who didn't see it coming wasn't out there in 2014 and 2013 like I was. But when you have people who feel that they've been passed by economically, socially, culturally, and politically, and they're fed a steady diet of resentment, and they don't ever meet anybody different from them or talk to anybody, then that's the core of it. And all you need is a little leaving. People get careless about whether they vote at midterm. People read this, that, the other thing. Pretty soon, somebody else says, well, you can have your resentment. I want my resentment. My resentment's more authentic than your resentment. Let's fight about whose resentment is the most authentic. And pretty soon, somebody's trying to keep you from voting, or just erasing you from the polls with some app, not subject to review. Pretty soon another country thinks, these people are so messed up, so torn up and upset, so full of their resentment, I'll mess with their heads. Isn't the internet wonderful? The answer is yes and no. The answer to everything is yes and no. That's why democracy requires diversity and debate. There are almost no unmixed blessings. I don't think that they ever wanted to go to Little Rock Central High School and get a good education and have a good life so that one day they could be in control of everybody that didn't look like them and squeeze them by the neck until they couldn't breathe. I think they wanted to be part of America, part of a world, to be full the way God meant us all to be. You can't do that if all you think about is that 0.5% difference. You can't do that if you ignore the plain teaching of every faith that nobody is all wise and right all the time. And every religion says, in one way or the other, after the love of God, the most important thing is to love your neighbor. So all the clever people who want to divide it say, yeah, but what's the definition of neighbor? They do not remember the parable of the Good Samaritan, and that the Samaritan was not generally thought to be the neighbor of the Israelites. There's still 200,000 of them today in the Middle East, and they're endangered like every other small religion there by people who, in the name of their perfect knowledge of the will of God, want to squash them because it makes them feel good to hurt somebody else. The Torah says he who turns aside a stranger might as well turn away from the Most High God. The Quran says Allah put different people on the earth, not that they might despise one another, but that they might come to know one another and learn from one another. The Dhammapada of the Buddha says that you are not really alive unless you can feel the arrow piercing another person's body as if it were entering your own. What is the matter with us? I heard that rally down in Alabama, and I thought about, oh my God, I got to go come look at the Little Rock Nine. And they're down there talking in ways that you hadn't heard since George Corley-Wallace was governor of Alabama. And again, they forgot the history. Wallace was the first guy who thought, oh, I can get white folks all over America to vote just like they do here. I just got to get them torn up and upset enough. Got to fill them with resentment. Got to stop people thinking they've forgotten. I knew George Wallace in the last years of his life, and we served as governors. I remember when he apologized to the people of Alabama for fanning the flames of racial hatred and discrimination and asked the African Americans of Alabama to forgive him and promised to serve them all. I remember when his bullet-ridden, paralyzed body was so painful it took him 2 hours to get dressed every day, and he got up 2 hours early for me one day to go to a governor's meeting to protest new rules against aid for disabled coal miners and others who were being thrown off disabilities. I remember there was a truck driver with a 9th grade education who lost his arm in an accident who was cut off a disability because they said he could work as a telephone receptionist. George Wallace got up out of bed to vote against that. He became reconciled to the fact that we all had a place in America's design. We don't want to go back there, folks. We don't want to get into, we don't want to get into my resentment's more authentic than yours. We want to look at Skip Gates' program on television and find out all the funny things about our ancestors we never dreamed about and say, wow, how dumb were any of us ever to deny any possibility to any American. I want these young people to have the brightest future ever offered to any generation. Part of it, you know, is whether we can keep creating jobs in the face of robotics and artificial intelligence and all these changes that are going to happen. Part of it is, can we really ever bring again the same economic opportunities to small town and rural Americas that they once had? I think the answer to both is yes, but it won't happen by feeding our resentments, especially our resentment against immigrants. Because we, native-born Americans, I just remember three things. The birth rate among native-born Americans is now only at replacement level. That is, we're not growing. The median age of a workforce determines, along with the education level of the people and the investment level and growth, the prosperity of a country. Having lost it, I can tell you, youth matters. When it comes, it matters in a lot of ways, but it really does matter in economic potential. Fact number 2, the crime rate among immigrants, including undocumented immigrants, is 1/2 the crime rate of the native born. Fact number 3, the small business formation rate, however, is twice that of the native born. We should be worrying about our real problems and how we can solve them together. That would honor the Little Rock Nine and the lives they have lived and the work they had done. Do we have problems with health care? Yes. Do we need to protect our border from people that would use it to come in and hurt us? Of course. Are the national security questions we face simple? No. But I'll tell you one thing, we're not going to get from here to there by making people mad. We're going to get from here to there by providing what they got at Little Rock Central High. 90 years ago, when the school opened, it was somebody designated it the most beautiful school building in America. 20 years after that, its football team was designated the best high school football team in America, not in the state. When I was a governor, this one school regularly won 25 or 30% of all the merit scholarships in the state. But had to work like crazy to win the Latin prize over one persistent competitor from Deer, Arkansas, population 300. Because there was one woman who loved that town and had always loved the history of Rome and taught, and the Deer, Arkansas had a Latin banquet then, Governor, and the Game and Fish Commission would give one permit every year to kill a bear. And the condition, and it was by lottery, and the condition of getting the bear permit was that you had to give half the meat to deer because the Romans ate bear meat, and this lady had a cookbook from Roman times, and I went to Deer, Arkansas to eat it. I thought it was made up, so I went to the Latin banquet. And the high school gym was covered in cheese. They were the only people who could compete with Little Rock Central High. Why am I telling you this? Because that's the real meaning of their lives. All they wanted to do was to live their lives and be a part of America. Not a part of America, not in control of America, but a part of America. That's what this ought to be about. John Lewis said on the floor of the Congress the other day that he was inspired as a young man of 17 by them, and that he had to find a way to get in the wave. So we all got to get in the wave. This country is by far the best positioned country in the world for the 21st century. There's no point in our getting in our own way any longer. But we have to reject resentment and anger in favor of answers. We have to reject polarization and demonization in favor of mutual respect. Last night we opened the Mandela exhibit at the library, and I never cease to be amazed at the disciplined respect Mandela showed his political adversaries. He put the people who put him in prison 27 years in his government, and told his own people who criticized him, they said, hey, you just got 62% of the vote against 18 opponents. Are you out of your mind putting them in? He said, yeah, but we just voted for the first time in 300 years. Can we run the banks or the military or anything all by ourselves? But it's a question anyone could ask in any place in America. Can people just like you and only like you, who only know what you know and think like you think, meet any of the challenges we face all by ourselves? The answer is always going to be no. Diverse groups make better decisions than lone geniuses and like-minded people, and people that are so siloed they can't bear to think about something that they are predisposed not to believe. So we face an emotional question, a question of the heart, and a question of the mind today. Do you really believe in the legacy of the Little Rock Nine? Are you really grateful? If you're a parent or a grandparent, can't you imagine how their parents felt the first day they set out? The lasting memory I have of the 40th reunion, believe it or not, is not that I was president. I was glad that the most important thing I had to do was to hold the door open so that the world could see the reality of what its symbolic message was. Because I was afraid I couldn't give a talk because Hillary and I had just taken Chelsea to college. And we literally had to be run out of the room, the dorm room. She was our only child. It was a deal. And I realized that when I got here, that their parents let them come here, terrified, because of the promise that it offered, that I had just taken for granted for my daughter. That's what I remember. Are we really going to let more than 200 years of our struggle to get over the idea that our differences are more important than our common humanity just be blown away? You really want to go back to what it was like before World War II or the 20s or whatever? I lived through the 50s and 60s. I'm proud of what was done, but it wasn't pretty. And a lot of people lost their lives. So I ask you to say to them, we love you. You taught us that in economics and social policy and in politics, addition is better than subtraction, and multiplication is better than division. We could have learned it in grade school, but if we didn't learn it from them in Central High, we will never learn it. So, celebrate today. Feel like wise, older people. Put on your dancing shoes tonight. But tomorrow, just like John Lewis, you made us get in the wave. We need to get in the wave again. So tomorrow, we need you again. Put on your marching boots, and we'll get in the wave. God bless you.